start recording. So can you all see slides?
Yep.
Okay. Can you also see when I move the mouse?
Yes.
Okay, good. So let's talk about syncretism today, which is a topic that I made a recent video on. I'm not sure if you watched it, but we will talk about some of that as well here, but also more generally about the topic of syncretism, what it is, how it affects the nature of a tradition. Maybe that's one of the things that tends to be debated in practitioner circles. But syncretism at its core is the amalgamation of different religious, spiritual, or esoteric traditions into a cohesive new form. And this blending process is not merely a superficial combination of external elements, but a profound integration that gives rise to novel interpretations and practices. And the concept of syncretism is pivotal for esoteric practitioners, as it really reflects the dynamic, evolving nature of esoteric traditions that, you know, you really... Oh, okay. Sorry, I just saw the closed captions thing. So as I was saying, that syncretism is something that really shows and reflects the dynamic evolving nature of esoteric traditions, because they tend to be dynamic and evolving. And we'll see that during this lecture that syncretism has also been used as an instrument for traditions to survive. And these esoteric traditions are living streams of wisdom that are continuously enriched by their intersections with diverse spiritual landscapes, and there's really always an encounter between different cultures that tends to give rise, but not necessarily in all cases, but it gives rise to syncretism. And when it comes to the academic exploration of syncretism, this really provides us with a lens to examine these complex processes of spiritual fusion. Hanegraaff in 1998 defined syncretism as a precondition for the survival of esoteric traditions in the modern world, highlighting its significance in the transmission and transformation of esoteric knowledge. And this is from New Age religion and Western culture, if you're interested in what in the book. And yes, this is the definition. So esoteric traditions, with their rich mystical, religious, and philosophical, and even scientific elements, tend to stand as testimonies to the human quest for understanding the hidden aspects of reality. And the inherent syncretism of these traditions is not just a feature of their historical development, but is also fundamental to the very essence of traditions. This eclectic synthesis allows esoteric practices to serve as living bridges between the material and the spiritual, the known and the mysterious. Historically, esotericism has flourished at the crossroads of cultures and ideas, where the exchange and integration of diverse spiritual and intellectual currents could really occur freely and be offered. From the ancient wisdom of Egypt and Mesopotamia to the mystical philosophies of Greece and the esoteric traditions of the Renaissance that we will all explore, syncretism has been a driving force in the evolution of esoteric thought. So Antoine Febvre, which I'm not sure if you're familiar with, but I've mentioned him a few times. He could be considered the founding fathers, or one of the founding fathers of the academic field of Esotericism. He points to syncretism as a key characteristic of esoteric spirituality. In 1994, Febvre identifies the ability to synthesize disparate currents of thoughts as a defining feature of the esoteric tradition, arguing that this synthesis is guided by specific patterns and principles rather than being a mere accumulation of ideas. And this is in Access to Western Esotericism. This deliberate synthesis is aimed at uncovering deeper hidden truths on the part of practitioners. I mean, that's what's believed, that lie beyond the surface of material reality and conventional religious dogma. And you will find that the idea of perennialism is slithering all over this lecture of about syncretism. So we can see, for example, the Hermetic tradition, with its roots in Greco-Egyptian culture, exemplifies the syncretic nature of Esotericism, because Hermetic texts combine elements of Greek philosophy, Christian theology, Egyptian religious ideas, and really create a holistic system that seeks to understand the cosmos and the divine. And in a similar way, the Kabbalah is a mystical tradition within Judaism, but has been integrated into Christian and occult practices. And this really illustrates the fluid boundaries and fertile exchange of ideas within esotericism. Now, esotericism's syncretic nature reflects a deeper quest for a universal wisdom, or prisca theologia, a belief in a primordial truth that predates and underlies all religious and philosophical traditions. And this is also called perennialism, in case you are unfamiliar with it. The idea that there is one primordial truth, one truth that underlies all the different religions, all the different traditions. They are actually all talking about the same thing. So that is one of the defining features of perennialism, this seeking of a transversal truth across different traditions and cultures and times in history. And this quest has led esoteric practitioners to incorporate alchemical, astrological, and mystical symbols and practices from a wide range of cultures into their spiritual pursuits. Now, as you can tell, and has also mentioned by scholars like Febvre and Hanegraaff, syncretism seems to be an integral part of esoteric traditions and esoteric practices. And I think that this is primarily for two reasons that we have kind of briefly mentioned. The first one for sure, the second one not as much. So I think that the main two reasons as to why syncretism is particularly a feature of esoteric traditions more than of religious traditions, because of course you also find that religious traditions have syncretic elements, because that is part of any aspect of human culture or any cultural product, including religion. But I think that it is particularly the case with esoteric traditions, and that is for two reasons. The one is that esoteric traditions tend to have almost an inherent perennialist approach. So this idea that there is a truth underlying all traditions and all cultures, and so by including all these different things, you are getting closer to the truth. There's this idea that incorporating more and more and finding the parallels and the links and the similarities, you're actually getting closer to that perennial truth, that prisca theologia, or theologia, if you want to use the classical Latin pronunciation. The second reason, I think that esoteric traditions are generally, albeit not always, of course, non-dogmatic, in that differently from established religions who have their own central theology that tends to be tends to have certain people within that religion that have power over what the theology is. In esoteric traditions, it tends to be a bit more fluid. It's less dogmatic, it's less structured, and so you don't have one set of people that design what the core theology is, and you have to stick to it to keep the nature of that specific religion intact or recognizable. And of course, there are also exceptions, because there are esoteric traditions that are more structured and a bit more dogmatic, but more generally speaking, esoteric practices and esoteric traditions are largely much less dogmatic than institutionalized religions. And I'm thinking especially about the three main monotheisms. So I think these are the two primary reasons as to why syncretism is particularly a feature of esoteric traditions and esoteric practice, even more esoteric practice, because if we talk about esoteric traditions, then we can argue there are some traditions that are more dogmatic, but with esoteric practices that are more based on the practice and the fact that people will practice things very differently because they won't get excommunicated from it. Well, I guess there may be some traditions where that might happen, but in a more general sense, esoteric practices tend to have less of a dogmatic hold from a central authority. Now, in the modern era, syncretism also plays a crucial role in the evolution of Esoteric traditions. The Theosophical Society, which has popularized to the largest extent ever perennialism, was founded in the late 19th century by Helena Blavatsky and sought to create a universal brotherhood of humanity by blending elements of Eastern religions, Western occultism, and science. And this movement exemplifies the ongoing relevance of syncretism in addressing the spiritual and existential questions of contemporary society. In a similar way, the New Age movement of the late 20th century represents a form of syncretism, drawing on Eastern spiritualities, ancient mysticism, and modern psychology to create a holistic approach to personal and cosmic understanding of these esoteric truths. The integration of quantum physics, which is something that we also find in the New Age movement and in contemporary esoteric practices, into the spiritual discourse, also really underscores the syncretic blending of science and spirituality. So you don't only have the syncretism of different religious, spiritual, and esoteric traditions, but also the syncretism between science and spirituality. And I can say that for the most part, that's really bad science that I see in the New Age movement and in spiritual circles. But that's a different topic. So so the exploration of syncretism within spiritual and esoteric practices will not just be here an academic endeavor, even though, of course, we will talk about it in academic terms, but it is also a journey into that you can do into the heart of these spiritual identities and beliefs, even if you approach this as a practitioner and if your interest is more that of a practitioner. And I think that engaging with syncretism and the idea of syncretism really encourages us to understand the historical interweaving of different traditions and the impact that these syntheses have on the quest that practitioners have for their own spiritual growth and understanding. Now, let's talk about the Hellenistic era first, so that we have an overview historically of how syncretism has played out in different times. Because I feel that sometimes, I don't know if you guys agree with me, we can talk about that in the discussion during the discussion time, but I always have the perception that people tend to show an aversion to certain forms of syncretism nowadays as if there was something new. And it's clearly not. So the Hellenistic era, spanning from the death of Alexander the Great in 323, I always forget how to say the the dates that are with three numbers. 323. Let's go with that. BCE. To the emergence of the Roman Empire stands as a seminal period in the history of cultural and philosophical development. Now, Alexander's conquest dismantled the barriers between the East and West, inaugurating an era of profound cultural and intellectual exchange that spanned from the Mediterranean to the borders of India. And this period witnessed the synthesis of Greek culture with the diverse traditions of the conquered territories, leading to significant advancements in art, science, philosophy, and religion. And one of the most remarkable features of the Hellenistic era was the establishment of cities such as Alexandria of Egypt, which became the epitome of Hellenistic culture and scholarship at the time. And it was founded by Alexander the Great in 331 BCE. And Alexandria really embodied the spirit of Hellenistic syncretism, particularly through its famed library and museion. The museion is the Greek word from which museum comes from. And it was a research institution that attracted scholars from across the known world. And these institutions facilitated the cross-pollination of ideas and became a beacon for scholarly activity, where philosophical and religious traditions of Greece, Egypt, Persia, and later on Judaism and Christianity were studied, compared, and integrated. In Alexandria and other Hellenistic centers, Greek philosophical traditions encountered the mystical and religious systems of the East, giving rise to new forms of spiritual and philosophical thought. And among these, we have Neoplatonism and Gnosticism that stand out as significant syncretic philosophies that would leave a lasting impact on Western historic and religious traditions. With Neoplatonism, we see that it developed. I have a dedicated video on my YouTube channel if you're interested. It developed in the 3rd century CE by Plotinus. And even though it was actually later on called Neoplatonism, Plotinus didn't call it Neoplatonism at the time. He sought to harmonize Plato's philosophy with the mystical traditions and religious encounters in the Hellenistic world. Neoplatonism posited a single source of all existence, the one from which emanated the nous, the divine mind, the word soul, and subsequently the material world. And this emanationist cosmology integrated elements of Persian and Indian philosophies that offered a metaphysical framework that transcended cultural and religious boundaries. Neoplatonism's influence extended into the Christian and Islamic worlds and really shaped theological and mystical discourses for centuries in these religious traditions. Then we have Gnosticism, which is a term that encompasses a wide array of religious movements that emerged in the same milieu, presented really a syncretic blend of Christian, Jewish, and pagan elements, combined with philosophical concepts drawn from Platonic and Stoic traditions. Gnostic systems typically featured a dualistic worldview, positing a stark division between the spiritual realm of light and the material realm of darkness. Gnosticism emphasized personal mystical knowledge, or gnosis, of the divine as the path to salvation, reflecting influences from Eastern religions focused on enlightenment and liberation. So, as you can see, the Hellenistic era's contribution to the development of syncretic spiritual and philosophical traditions cannot be overstated. By bringing together diverse cultural and intellectual streams, it created the rich soil in which new forms of thought could flourish. The syncretic philosophies of Neoplatonism and Gnosticism, among others, really exemplify this era's capacity for intellectual innovation and its enduring legacy in shaping the contours of Western spiritual and historic thought. And the Renaissance, one of my favorite periods, maybe because it was so rich in Italy. So the Renaissance was a period of profound cultural and intellectual rejuvenation in Europe, spanning roughly from the 14th century to the 17th century, and is often celebrated for its rediscovery of the classical learning of Greece and Rome. However, this era was also remarkable for its vibrant syncretism, marked by a keen interest in the esoteric traditions of the Near East, and the integration of these traditions into the fabric of Western thought and spirituality. This period's syncretic character was significantly fueled by the fall of Constantinople in 1453, which led to an influx of Greek scholars and manuscripts into Western Europe. Also, the advent of the printing press facilitated the widespread dissemination of text that had been lost or inaccessible for centuries. Among these, we have no other than the Corpus Hermeticum, a collection of Greek mystical and philosophical texts attributed to Hermes Trismegistus, which played a pivotal role in the Renaissance spiritual and intellectual landscape, but obviously has impacted the whole Western historicism. So the Corpus Hermeticum was translated into Latin by Marsilio Ficino at the behest of Cosimo de' Medici, because that became really, so it was founded by Cosimo de' Medici, and it became really a cornerstone of Renaissance thought. Ficino, who had initially been commissioned to translate the works of Plato, saw in the Hermetic text a profound ancient wisdom that complemented the Platonic tradition. Hermeticism, with its emphasis on the divine intellect, or nous in Greek, the animating soul of the world, anima mundi in Latin, and the potential for human beings to ascend to divine status through spiritual rebirth and enlightenment, resonated deeply with the Renaissance spirit of individual potential and the quest for direct personal experience of the divine. So the Renaissance syncretic impulse extended beyond Hermeticism to encompass a wide array of esoteric traditions. We have the Kabbalah that we will discuss later, a Jewish mystical tradition that was embraced by many Christian humanists who sought to uncover a universal truth underlying all religious and philosophical systems. We have also Giovanni Pico della Mirandola, who was a key figure of the Renaissance, another Italian, famously proposed that such a universal truth could be found through the synthesis of Hermetic, Platonic, Kabbalistic, and Christian thought. So Giovanni Pico della Mirandola was actually an important figure, because even though you can see that perennialism is seeping through this whole history of syncretism in Western historicism, but Giovanni Pico della Mirandola was one who said, you know what? If we put all of these together, we can actually achieve that perennial truth if we combine them all together. So with his 900 Theses from 1486 and his oration on the dignity of man, he articulated a vision of human potential and divine unity that drew from these different and diverse traditions. And that illustrated really the era's eclectic approach to spirituality and knowledge, and also the route towards gaining that perennial truth that was sought after. Now, the syncretic blend of Hermetic, Platonic, Kabbalistic, and Christian ideas during the Renaissance contributed to the flowering of arts, sciences, and literature that was driven by a belief in the power of human creativity and intellect. This period really laid the groundwork for the modern scientific method, while also contributing to the development of esoteric thought and the Western mystical tradition. The Renaissance engagement with ancient and esoteric wisdom also reflected broader cultural shifts, including the rise of humanism, which emphasized the value of agency of human beings, and the challenge to the authority of traditional religious institutions. So, by seeking wisdom in a variety of traditions, Renaissance thinkers embodied the spirit of inquiry and openness that would characterize the modern age. So if you look at it this way, by looking at different traditions, you're becoming more of a rebel, because, first of all, esoteric traditions are less dogmatic than traditional religions. But also, if you source from so many different traditions, you will not find a central authority at all, because the central authority becomes you combining all these things together. So it's another step towards the individual agency and authority over their own spiritual beliefs and historic practices. Now, the integration of the Kabbalah into Christian and Renaissance thought also represents another significant instance of syncretism. The mystical teachings of the Kabbalah, which explored the nature of divinity, the structure of the universe, and the soul's journey, were embraced by many Christian scholars, and they saw in the Kabbalah a source of ancient wisdom that could complement and deepen their understanding of Christian mysteries. This period witnessed the creation of Christian Kabbalistic works, which sought to reconcile Jewish mystical teachings with Christian dogma, further illustrating the syncretic nature of the quest for spiritual knowledge. But we will talk more about Kabbalah later. Now, syncretism in the modern era represents a significant and complex phenomenon that was influenced by the accelerated pace of globalization, advancements in communication technologies, and increasing cultural exchanges. This period, particularly marked by the emergence and growth of the New Age movement in the late 20th century, exemplifies the continuous and dynamic process of spiritual syncretism that has characterized human history from the Hellenistic era and Renaissance to contemporary times. The New Age movement, with its eclectic and inclusive approach to spirituality, serves as a quintessential example of modern syncretism. It is characterized by a holistic worldview that integrates elements from Eastern spiritualities, such as Buddhism and Hinduism, with Western historic traditions, indigenous shamanic practices, and even the findings of quantum physics and psychology. This synthesis reflects a desire among New Age adherents to explore spirituality beyond the confines of institutionalized religions, seeking personal enlightenment and healing through a variety of practices, including meditation, astrology, crystal healing, and channeling. The modern era's unprecedented level of global connectivity has also facilitated the spread and integration of spiritual traditions more and more over time. So we see that advances in travel and communication technologies have really allowed for the rapid exchange of ideas and practices across continents, which really led and leads to syncretic spiritualities. Now, while the modern syncretic movement offers opportunities for spiritual exploration and innovation, it also faces critiques related to cultural appropriation, superficiality, and the commodification of spiritual practices. Critics argue that the selective incorporation of elements from various traditions without a deep understanding of their cultural and historical context can lead to a diluted or even distorted form of spirituality. But we can talk about that more in the discussion time. So let's look at some case studies. So the first one is on the Kabbalistic influence on Western historicism. So the integration of Kabbalah into Western esoteric thought marks a profound example of religious and philosophical syncretism. Originating in the late 12th century, in the late 12th century, within the Jewish mystical tradition, Kabbalah explores the nature of divinity, the structure of the universe, the process of creation, and the journey of the soul. And it has had a profound influence on Western esotericism, which began primarily during the Renaissance, when Christian scholars and mystics encountered Jewish Kabbalistic texts. Christian Kabbalists that we have mentioned, like Giovanni Pico della Mirandola and Johannes Reuchlin, sought to reconcile Kabbalistic teachings with Christian doctrine, seeing in Kabbalah a universal wisdom that could illuminate and deepen Christian understanding. The Sephirotic tree of life, with its intricate depiction of divine emanations, became a central symbol in many historic traditions, embodying the cosmic order and the path of spiritual ascent. Gershom Scholem's seminal work, you probably know this scholar, he is like the big scholar in Kabbalah, probably one of the first academic scholars in Kabbalah. His work from 1974 provides an exhaustive study of these developments, and it's called Kabbalah, highlighting how the Kabbalah's mystical concepts, such as the Sephirot and the notion of Ein Sof, the infinite, were adapted and integrated into the broader Western esoteric tradition. Then we have Afro-Caribbean traditions and religions, which represent a dynamic and resilient form of syncretism, born out of the transatlantic slave trade's brutal history. Enslaved Africans brought with them various religious traditions, which over time blended with the Christian beliefs of their colonial masters and the indigenous practices of the Americas. This syncretism served as both a form of resistance against the adaptation to oppressive conditions, allowing African spiritual traditions to survive and flourish. And also as a way to define their identity in this new way. Voodoo in Haiti combines elements of West African religions, notably Vodun from the Kingdom of Dahomey, now Benin, with Roman Catholicism and indigenous Taino beliefs. Voodoo deities, or Loa, correspond to Christian saints, creating a complex pantheon that encapsulates the spiritual heritage of its practitioners. Then we have Santeria, also known as Lukumi, originated among the Yoruba people of Nigeria and then was transplanted to Cuba. It merges the worship of the Orishas, or the Yoruba deities, with Catholic saints. The religion's practices include divination, animal sacrifice, and the use of drums and dance to connect with the divine. Then we have Candomblé in Brazil that reflects the syncretism of Yoruba, Fon, and Bantu beliefs from West and Central Africa with Roman Catholicism. And it is characterized by the worship of orishas, elaborate rituals, and music and dance as mediums of spiritual connections. So as you can see, we find that in these traditions, the syncretism has been a means of resistance, survival, and also defining their own identity. The Theosophical Society, which is also an important, obviously, stepping stone in Western Esotericism, and especially when it comes to syncretism, as we know, was founded in 1875 by Elena Petrovna Blavatsky, Colonel Henry Seal Olcott, and William Cohn Judge, marked a significant moment in the history of modern spiritual syncretism because the society aimed to forge this idea of universal brotherhood without distinction of race, creed, sex, caste, color, and it was promoting the study of comparative religion, philosophy, and science. So we see in Isis Unveiled and the Secret Doctrine by Blavatsky that she draws from a plethora of sources, including Hindu and Buddhist scriptures, Western occultism, ancient mythologies, and proposing a syncretism of Eastern and Western esoteric teachings. The Theosophical Society's emphasis on the ancient wisdom tradition, or Theosophia, suggested that all religions share a common truth, or wisdom religion, at their core. And this is obviously the core of the perennialism. So the society's influence extended beyond spiritual and esoteric circles, impacting arts, science, and the study of religion. And now let's look at different types of syncretism. Oh, sorry. Different types of syncretism. So the expression of syncretism in esoteric practices unveils the rich landscape of spiritual evolution that was characterized by the blending and merging of diverse traditions. And this process, far from being a mere amalgamation, signifies a profound transformation and adaptation of spiritual practices that reflect the dynamic interplay between different cultures, beliefs, and historical periods. So let's now look at the different types of syncretism that we find. So we have as the first type of syncretism, religious syncretism, which represents a conscious effort to reconcile and integrate spiritual beliefs and practices from various religious traditions. This type of syncretism often emerges in context where spiritual seekers encounter and engage with multiple religious philosophies, leading to the creation of a new hybrid spiritual framework. A historical example of religious syncretism can be found in the Alexandrian world, where Greco-Egyptian syncretism led to the emergence of new deities like Serapis, who combined aspects of the Greek and Egyptian gods. In fact, in Italy, what arrived was the, not Isis and Osiris, but Isis and Serapis. Similarly, in the Roman Empire's practice of adopting the gods of conquered peoples facilitated the spread of Eastern religious practices across the empire, blending them with Roman paganism. So in modern context, religious syncretism is evident in movements such as the New Age, where elements of Buddhism, Hinduism, and other Eastern traditions are integrated with Western esoteric and spiritual practices. And also we see that this blending includes the adoption of meditation, yoga, and concepts like karma and reincarnation that are changed, almost translated, tailored to fit within a Western spiritual paradigm. Then we have cultural syncretism. Cultural syncretism extends beyond the purely religious sphere, and it encompasses the merging of cultural practices, art forms, and rituals that carry spiritual significance. So this form of syncretism often arises from the interaction between different cultures, leading to the enrichment of a community's cultural and spiritual life. The incorporation of indigenous shamanic practices into Western spiritual context is a vivid example of cultural syncretism. This includes the use of ayahuasca in healing ceremonies, which combines indigenous Amazonian practices with Western psychotherapeutic techniques. And such syncretism not only introduces new spiritual dimensions to Western seekers, but also raises important questions about cultural appropriation and the ethical dimensions of spiritual practice. Then we have intentional versus organic syncretism. Intentional syncretism is characterized by a deliberate effort to create new syncretic practices that bridge gaps between different spiritual traditions. This approach is often driven by a desire to construct a universal or more inclusive spiritual path that resonates with contemporary spiritual seekers. The development of modern neo-pagan paths, which draw from ancient pagan traditions, feminist spirituality, and ecological consciousness, is a prime example of this. These paths consciously integrate diverse elements to address modern spiritual and societal concerns, creating a vibrant and evolving spiritual tradition. Organic syncretism, in contrast, occurs as a natural outcome of cultural and religious interactions over time. It is not the result of a planned effort, but it really emerges from the lived experiences of communities that find themselves at the crossroads of different cultures. The syncretism observed in Afro-Caribbean religions such as Vodou and Santeria epitomizes organic syncretism. These religions have evolved through the blending of African religious traditions with Christianity and indigenous beliefs, reflecting really the complex history of colonialism, enslavement, and the cultural exchange in the Americas. Now, I would say I don't want to overload you guys too much and want to leave space for discussion. So we can reflect on the legitimacy and challenges of syncretism. We can call it legitimate versus illegitimate or honest versus dishonest syncretism. I still haven't found the typology that satisfies me in terms of the terms themselves. But the debate over the legitimacy of syncretic practices within historic traditions centers around issues of authenticity, respect for source traditions, and the depth of integration. Legitimate syncretism is marked by an informed and respectful engagement with the traditions it seeks to integrate, ensuring that the synthesis honors the integrity and essence of the source traditions. So this involves a deep understanding of the historical, cultural, and spiritual context from which these traditions emerge. The challenge then lies in navigating the fine line between respectful integration and cultural appropriation, a concern that is particularly relevant in cases of cultural syncretism. The ethical engagement with syncretic practices demands a mindful approach that acknowledges the origins and meanings of the integrated elements, ensuring that the resulting syncretic tradition enriches the spiritual landscape without diminishing the value or integrity of its constituent parts. And then we can talk about ethical considerations, because navigating the challenges of navigating the challenges of syncretism also includes the ethical considerations that practitioners may want to consider, because ethical considerations play a crucial role in determining whether the syncretism is what I typologized as honest versus dishonest syncretism, but also if it is even legitimate to include certain elements or not. So concerns about cultural appropriation and commodification of spiritual practices are paramount. And if you're interested in the topic of cultural appropriation, I have a roundtable and a video on the topic on my YouTube channel where I explain in more depth what constitutes a cultural appropriation. But it is usually determined by the fact that the appropriating tradition is one that is in a power imbalance with the one that is appropriated, and the appropriated one, who's already a minority, gets damaged because of it. So that's what cultural appropriation is in a nutshell. So navigating the challenges of syncretism also requires a mindful and informed approach, because practitioners and scholars need to critically examine their engagement with syncretic practices, considering the implications of the choices that are made, really. And this involves ongoing education, ethical reflections, being open about the inclusions that are made instead of making up stuff, as I mentioned in my video on honest and dishonest syncretism. But another thing that I find quite interesting, and maybe we can close here and then open the discussion because I don't want to overload you too much. Given that syncretism is the process of integrating elements from diverse spiritual and religious traditions, and it is a multifaceted phenomenon that it's unavoidable that it raises significant questions about the impact and the nature, on the impact on the nature and integrity of the traditions that get blended. This intricate process of cultural and religious fusion has been both celebrated for its potential to enrich and revitalize spiritual practices, and critiqued for the challenges that it poses to the authenticity and continuity of traditional forms. And historically, syncretism has served as a dynamic force in the evolution of religious and esoteric practices, as we have seen. It facilitated cross-pollination of ideas and rituals across cultures, and even across different times. We saw that with the Hellenistic era, for instance. And at the same time, in the Renaissance, we saw that there was a revival of Hermetic and Platonic wisdom. So we have seen how syncretism has definitely fostered a revitalization of traditions, or even the creation of traditions that would have otherwise never been born. Despite this enriching potential, syncretism's impact on the integrity of traditional practices remains a contentious issue. And critics argue that the blending of disparate elements can dilute foundational beliefs and rituals, leading to a loss of the unique identity and core teachings of a tradition. And this concern is particularly acute in contexts where syncretism involves the appropriation of practices from marginalized and indigenous cultures by dominant cultural groups. In this case, also raising ethical questions about respect, understanding, and consent. So the challenge lies in balancing the innovative impulses of syncretism with a commitment to preserving the essence and authenticity of the traditions involved. And this requires a nuanced approach that acknowledges the historical, cultural, and spiritual dimensions and the practices being integrated. And as scholars like Antoine Favre and Walter Hanegraaff have noted, legitimate syncretism is characterized by a deep engagement with and respect for the source traditions, ensuring that new syntheses honor the integrity and intentions of original practices. So to conclude, before opening the floor to discussion, the debate over syncretism and the integrity of spiritual traditions underscores how complex the interplay between innovation and preservation in religious and esoteric traditions is. And while syncretism offers the promise of spiritual enrichment and adaptation, it also demands a careful and respectful approach to the integration of diverse elements, and especially an acknowledgement of it. By remaining mindful of the ethical and philosophical implications of syncretism, I think that both practitioners and scholars can contribute to the development of practices that respect the richness of the world's spiritual heritage, while also embracing the potential for growth and transformation. So now let's open the floor to discussion. You've had enough from me, I guess. So what do you think about syncretism? Do you think that it is something that helps traditions to survive and adapt? And or do you think that it changes the nature of traditions? And is it a problem if it changes the nature of a tradition? And when is syncretism a problem? If it is a problem. Andrew, you're muted.
Oh, yeah. Can you turn the captions off, please? I turned it on just to see how it works, but I can't seem to stop it. You